2020. Okay. Good morning. This is John Richardson speaking with you from Toronto, Canada. It is Friday morning, December the 20th, 2024. And as we wind down 2024, Representative Lahood has introduced a bill to make the life of certain American citizens abroad, I think, a little better. And joining me today to discuss that, at least on the 30,000-foot level, is well-known U.S. tax lawyer, Virginia, Torre Jeker. Looking forward to your initial thoughts, Virginia, and how are you otherwise?
Hey, John, I'm doing well, and this was certainly a nice end of the year gift, let's say.
Okay.
We don't know that it'll materialize, but it just goes to show you that discussion remains on the table.
Absolutely, and we don't know that it will materialize in the form that it's proposed either. This is a bit of a process, or as some people call it, a sausage-making process or whatever. But anyway, so generally, what are your thoughts on this? Let's start with what it's supposed to do.
Right. So Representative LaHood has introduced this Residence-Based Taxation for Americans Abroad Act. And this whole proposal is trying to shift from the current citizenship-based taxation model that we've been working with forever, where U.S. citizens are taxed on their worldwide income, regardless of where they may live, to a residency-based system. So this is really a system that's turning things on its head from the standpoint of the American living and working overseas.
Okay, but in fairness, it's not moving the United States to residence taxation. What it's doing is providing an elective, what I would call carve out for a certain group of Americans while they're living outside the United States. Would that be accurate?
That's definitely a good way to put it. It's an elective regime, so people can elect in if they want it and see if they meet all the requirements. If they do, the IRS will issue this residency certificate, and then they will be treated according to this residence-based tax model.
Okay, now two questions, just listening to you describe that. The first is you make the point that it's elective. So clearly there are people who would not elect into this, okay? Do you have any thoughts on the people who might not elect into it?
John, I really haven't thought much on that. Maybe you have.
Yeah, well, it would seem to me that the people whose financial center of gravity is in the United States, the people who have overwhelmingly U.S. source income, I think...
Even though they may be living and working overseas, is what you're saying.
Well, that's right. That's right, because the effect of this clearly is to treat those who elect in what are called electing individuals as more or less like non-resident aliens, right?
That's correct.
And this is, of course, something we've talked about in various contexts for like years, right? The differences in the way people are taxed, right?
So the non-resident alien individual is taxed on U.S. source income, either by a system of withholding, for example, on passive types of income like dividends. They are also taxed if they have business activities in the States and the income being earned from U.S. sources is effectively connected with that business activity. So I think what you're imagining, someone who would not elect in would not want that kind of treatment.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
It definitely creates, I think, a presumption of higher taxation. But the key point is selective. It's not going to be for everybody. Now, let's look at how it affects people who do elect in. So they are, assuming they meet the requirements, we'll get to in a minute, but they're electing to be taxed essentially as non-resident aliens. So let's close our eyes and imagine that we have Americans abroad with overwhelmingly non-U.S. source income and they're taxed as non-resident aliens. So the first question I would ask you is, are they being taxed by the United States on their non-U.S. source income?
Non-U.S. source income? Absolutely not.
All right, well, let's pause there. Now, non-U.S. source, that's a wide range of stuff. So now I'll tell you how I interpret that. You tell me if I get it wrong or when I get it wrong, but that would mean they would not be taxable on foreign dividends. It means they wouldn't be taxable on capital gains. Means they certainly wouldn't be taxable, any payment with a foreign source, whether it's, government benefits, for example.
Mm-hmm.
PFIC situation goes, right? PFIC
That's right.
situation goes all together. And the way this thing is drafted, there's a modification to 7701A30, and people talk what that means is that it appears that U.S. citizenship could not be used to turn something into a CFC at all. Okay, let alone taxation of income from those things. So, it seems to me it solves the guilty problem, the subpart F problem. Would you agree with all that?
That's right, because when the individual sets up his non-U.S. foreign corporation and he's treated as a foreigner, there is no such thing in that situation as a CFC or a PFIC. Those problems.
That's right. That's right. I mean, I thought this was very, very interesting. Now, on this point, right, you would agree with me that this bill does not end U.S. citizenship taxation at all. Agreed?
Oh, absolutely not. It doesn't
Okay.
end it.
So,
No way.
so that means that for everybody, I mean, Section 1 of the Internal Revenue Code speaks of all individuals, including that means everybody in the world has to pay tax, et cetera, et cetera. So that continues, okay? But by removing citizenship from the definition of U.S. person and the definitions, they've really created a situation, and this is very, very good, where U.S. citizenship could not be used to essentially create a foreign corporation, I think, right?
I agree. You mean it wouldn't change it into a CFC or something?
That's right. That's right.
Yes, exactly.
I think that's right.
So,
I mean, I'm probably speaking a little too quickly on this, okay? Because, as we know, these things aren't simple, but all of this is good news, okay? For now, so it would seem to me that the profile of people who would be all over this would be, long-term residents abroad whose center of financial gravity is non-U.S., right?
that's right. Because once this election is made, it is irrevocable, and you still have to, it can be terminated under special rules, and you still have to meet the non-residency requirements. But I think the fact that once the election is made, being irrevocable really does point to someone who is a long-term person outside of America, has set up his base outside of America, has his business there, and as you point out, would really benefit from not having to deal with CFCs and PFICs and guilty.
Right.
So
this would not, I mean, we're just speculating here, but I would imagine that somebody who's sent on an assignment for 4 or 5 years outside the United States would not get involved in this. Would you agree with that?
I think that we'd have to really look at completely examine his facts and circumstances, but I think that relatively short term abroad, if he can make do with the foreign earned income and housing exclusions and isn't thinking of setting up his own business, that this sounds like it would be maybe too onerous to go through.
Well, I think that's also true. Who we haven't talked about yet is that this is not exactly a free election. Now, I'm speaking prospectively. We'll talk about existing Americans abroad in a minute, but speaking prospectively, there is the potential, at least, of being subjected to a departure tax by electing this, right?
That's right. That's right.
Thing about it is, though, that applies only to people with what's currently a net worth of about $13 million. So it doesn't seem to me that would affect a large number of people. Would you agree?
That's right. At the moment, this departure tax will only impact people that have a net worth above what's the current estate tax exclusion, which right now is 13.6 million US dollars. So if the departure tax hits them, it's similar to the exit tax we know of in the expatriation regime. The departure tax would treat them as selling all of their assets worldwide, even though they didn't sell anything. So it's pretend sale, there's pretend gain, and they have to pay tax on that pretend gain. But this exclusion amount of 13.6 million, at the end of 2025, that's going to disappear. And unless Congress extends this provision, and if it does disappear and sunset, then we will be going back to the $5 million exclusion amount as indexed for inflation. which would probably get us to about $7 million net worth.
But yeah, anyway, it's a relatively high exclusion in any case. And there are some other requirements. One has to certify tax compliance for 5 years. But also, interestingly, and this is true right across the board, is there is a requirement of tax residency in another country. So you
That's
cannot, for example, go on a boat, for example, for a year or something like that, could you?
no.
Okay.
No.
So we've got that. And there's also a provision in here that basically, okay, so first of all, I think it's fairly clear that this is going to be a disincentive for anybody with a huge net worth to get involved in, right?
I would think so. They're better off just biting the bullet and expatriating, I would say.
I think that's probably right. And the expatriation regime does stay in place. But the thing is this, that for high net worth people, this is not, oh, great, I'm leaving, an easy decision at all. Okay, there are plenty of guardrails. And another guardrail is that the way I read this, that if they don't stay out of the United States for, I think it's a 4-year period, it's either 3 or 4 years, the whole thing gets reversed, right? Including taxation on any capital gain, on any assets they sold after they left, right?
I think so, John. I haven't focused on that part of the bill, so you might know more.
But there is a provision. I think the point is there are plenty of guardrails to give high net worth individuals a second thought on this. But
Yes.
But
Yes.
I think what's important here is that, we're talking so far about how this would work for people living prospectively. For existing Americans abroad, who've lived outside the United States for a long time before the the introduction of this thing, there are benefits, aren't there?
I would say absolutely, yes. As I remember, there might be a kind of grandfather rule for them.
There is. The way it works is,
Maybe you remember.
I don't have it in front of me, but in general, the way it works is this, okay? There's two groups. So the bill passes, or maybe it's the date that it's introduced, for people who are living outside the United States. Okay, the first category are people who've not lived in the United States according to the substantial presence test, I think for 3 of the last 5 years. That group can opt out without paying an exit tax, without being subject to departure tax, as long as they're able to certify 3 years, okay, the past 3 years of tax compliance. They, of course, have to be tax resident in another country. But interestingly, they introduce a requirement of ordinary residence. That person has to be ordinarily resident in the same country as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first group. I would call those, people who've left more recently. But the second group are people who've either lived outside who have not met the test for U.S. residence for any time after the age 25, or who, the same thing, since March 18th, 2010 FATCA. Now that group, interestingly, are able apparently just to sign out of this thing. No departure tax, no requirement of tax compliance either, which is interesting.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if it's going to stay the way it's written.
Well,
happen.
Yeah, we have to come to an end here for today. But what I think is incredibly dangerous here, and I hope that this gets changed, but basically the way this operates procedurally is that the IRS will be setting the rules. And
correct.
that
always leaves us in a quandary as to what they will be coming up with.
I think that's the most dangerous thing about this. Would you agree?
Yes, it is. And, nothing we can do, because my feeling is there is no way that all of the issues can be taken into account in this bill, okay? And
Right.
what might ultimately become legislation. So I think, unfortunately, a lot of it will be up to how the IRS is going to implement this.
Yeah, my personal view is the statute needs to have guardrails to limit the discretion of the IRS. As this is written right now, what's interestingly is that there are necessary conditions to make this election, but there doesn't appear to be any sufficient condition, anything in the bill that says if you meet these requirements, you have a statutory right to do this. But this is, of course, just the introduction. Nothing will happen for now. Virginia, thanks for joining me on short notice on this today. I'm absolutely certain that we'll be having another discussion about this fairly soon.
I think so.
And, Virginia has a fantastic tax blog, us-tax.org, us-tax.org, and you can get more of her wisdom, insight, and tremendous analysis there. So, Virginia, thanks very much, and I look forward to our next podcast.
That's right. I think it'll be sometime in January that we'll be discussing this again.
Oh, at the latest. Okay.
Okay. Have a great one, John.